This is the trauma kickoff session, also known as the full plate presentation, also known as it's already been on your plate session. And we'll get into what I mean. But first, once I told a chemistry joke, there was no reaction. All right, that's almost funny, right? And then I'm hoping that I don't do this to you. Trauma. We've had trauma since 2003, 2004, 2005. I'm going to really do more like this because what is learning? Learning is an emotional attachment to it. So this is from Jim Quick, really quick.
Information tied with that emotion becomes a long-term memory. Back in school, what was the primary emotion we felt? Boredom, right? Half the room is bored, the other half is confused. But on a scale of 0 to 10, what's boredom? Zero. Information times emotion. If the emotion is 0, what's anything times 0?
0.
I was talking to Bill Gates about what's missing. You have the tools, you have the theory, and we came to the same exact conclusion. Motivation. Right? Understanding human motivation. Why can somebody learn something, not apply it?
So this is a quote from Kurt Fisher. I'm going to bring it up again later. One of the most beneficial things that brain research has done is there's a direct correlation in our brain between emotion and cognition. So what I want to show to you today is it's not your fault. Okay? This is not blame the teacher day. This is not about bad teaching. This is about our students having so much going on that they cannot receive your wonderful education as quickly as well as they should. So I'm asking you to take notes and do it. I learned it from Jim Quick. I'm sure there's an educational term for it. But on your paper, you divide it down the middle. And on the left is just your regular notes. And on the right are your questions, your oh my God stuff, my question about this. I want more info. And think about in terms of these three things: your students, yourself personally, and as a teacher. Someone's not muted, sorry. And our education system's focus, think systemically. And I just this is where I was over the weekend, so just take a second. When we receive information that may be a little bit different than what we're already used to, we kind of have to receive it. We have to be in a frame of mind where we are willing to receive it. So that's my little Zen moment for a second, okay? So let's get into it. How much time, effort, energy, research, love do you put into your lessons? Let me hear from you. How much? A little bit? A lot? What you guys got?
A lot.
A lot, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel? What's your return on your investment?
I don't know.
How much?
A little,
right? Not as much as it doesn't really equate with how much energy you're putting into it, I guarantee. All right. And once again, I'm going to show you why that's happening, and we're going to come up with some solutions. So a definition that helps me make sense of trauma. To me, trauma equals pain. All right. And trauma is any experience that overwhelms your thoughts, your emotions, your body. Trauma is a very personal experience. How you remember an event can be very different from how someone else experienced the very same thing. And the statistics that Linda showed us, guess what? They're highlighted from what they were pre-pandemic. I did a survey of 400 students, and 72% of them had mild, moderate, severe symptoms of trauma. All right? So we can't just blame the pandemic. This has been going on, and we have not addressed it. And teachers are feeling the repercussions every day. So we're going to go into breakout rooms in a little bit, not just yet, but I want you to think about this. How important do you think it is it to have these skills? Being able to regulate your emotions, knowing why you do what you do, and what are you actually doing while you're doing it. That's self-awareness. How important is it to have empathy? How important is it to have good communication skills, being a good listener? What Brene Brown calls rising skills or resiliency. How important is it to be able to think accurately through difficult times? And think about you personally. When and how did you learn these skills? Or, and no judgment, have you learned them yet? Right? We're never taught these in school. So I'm going to play all these videos are about 6-7 minutes, but they all tie together. So this is a group of people talking about emotional intelligence skills or social emotional learning.
So this brings me to schools, because what you're saying makes me think that schools would really benefit from social emotional learning. What is exactly social emotional learning, and what are the benefits in schools?
Well, social emotional learning takes the elements of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, empathy, relationship skills, and it adds also good decision-making, particularly social decisions, and it folds them into lessons for children that are appropriate to the age.
The best investment, I would say, is in emotional intelligence and in mental balance and these kinds of skills of how to keep changing throughout your life, how to keep learning throughout your life. We don't have a college degree in mental flexibility, but these are the most important tools. So whatever you choose, you can go to law school, you can go to ballet school, but you should keep in mind that much of what I'm learning might be irrelevant in 20 or 30 years. So whatever else I'm doing, I should also invest in developing my emotional intelligence, my mental balance, my ability to keep changing and learning and reinventing throughout my life.
Dr. Richard Brown is an associate professor of clinical psychiatry at Columbia University and an author who's done extensive research in breathing.
Turns out how you breathe affects your brain and everything in your body. The stress response system for most people is way overactive, and the soothing, recharging, bonding system is way underactive. Because people are always stressed. They don't realize how stressed they are. They're breathing about 15 to 20 breaths per minute.
Slowing down one's breathing activates the parasympathetic system, bringing healing throughout the body. It improves the mind and body.
My guest today is Patrick McGonigal, the world-renowned breathing expert, author, and lecturer.
We know studied, statistics looking at children. 25 to 50% of studied children persistently mouth breathe. And if a child is mouth breathing, their sleep is impacted. And if their sleep is impacted, they have 40% chance of developing ADD, ADHD, and or a learning disability.
So you think it's all sleep related?
Sleep and breathing go together. If your breathing is off, your sleep is off.
But if we're sleep deprived, we're putting ourselves at a huge disadvantage. And then we go to the dark side. All right? Don't be that guy or that girl. This whole idea of sleep is for the weak. So we have to address the cultural connotation that sleep is a bad thing, okay? And that you can't be successful if you're not, if you're sleeping too much, right? The reality is, when we're sleep deprived, we're radically sacrificing quality. And there's a big difference between doing work and actually being effective, all right? And so we have to address that thing in our mind too. You're not being lazy. You're not missing the boat if you're getting sleep. You're being smart, all right? And I have this really unique opportunity to know some of the top people in the world in financial sphere, in the health sphere. And I'm telling you guys, they're all getting on board with really looking at their lifestyle and focusing on getting high quality sleep.
But the power of positive thinking never resonated with me. And when I was young and I was 18 years old and I'd drop out of college and I was diagnosed with an initial diagnosis of cancer, and it turned out to be shingles and a number of other things, I did start to understand quickly that, I don't know if positive thinking works all the time and that the data is anecdotal. I do know that negative thinking does work, and it works negatively. And one of the things is I would start at Alabama, and I would start with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I would start with the Miami Dolphins. I started to realize, and even looking back to a young age, that nobody wants to be told to be positive. Positive thinking in many cases repulses people. You're telling me to be positive and I'm going through a divorce. You're telling me to be positive and I threw 3 interceptions. You're telling me to be positive and I got this current situation. You're telling me to be positive and I got this health situation. So then what's the alternative? Well, the alternative has always been negative. What we learned was that negative thinking was the most powerful element that our players were combating. That negative thinking was weaponizing them against them. Well, if somebody says something out loud, it's 10 times more powerful than if they think it. And then as we started to study the data, particularly data that was just reinforced by Christine Porath from Georgetown and Harvard, that negativity is a multiple of 4 to 7 times more powerful than positivity. So think about that. If I say something out loud, it's 10x. If it's negative, it's 4 to 7 times more powerful. So when I say negative things out loud, it's 40 to 70 times more likely that that will happen or cause a result that won't be good for me than if I just didn't say anything.
We all have so much potential, there's so much possibility for every single person, but it's always, we hear this thing about fears holding us back. And so you really broke down and dissected these. So the first one is fear of failure.
Because you wonder, am I good enough? Am I worthy enough? Can I do this? And that takes you out of that space of love, of knowing like you can do the best you can. You can do a good job based on the tools that you've been given, right? But we're always judging ourselves compared to someone else. And that's kind of where, social media and a lot of people are experiencing so much anxiety with social media because now we're in constant state of comparison. But once you say, you know what, I'm just going to do the best that I can. I'm going to give this like 100% and let the chips fall where they may. And that attitude can get you through anything. And I like to remind people, you don't fail until you stop trying.
Why is movement specifically so important to mental well-being?
I almost don't even know where to begin with this. I mean, you can start with the data. If you just look at the data around the world, every country you can imagine that it has been studied in, every age group, every health status, every gender, every socioeconomic status, people who are more physically active are happier, they have better relationships, they have more meaning in life, they're less at risk for things like depression and loneliness. If you go further than just sort of that kind of epidemiology, and you look at how movement affects the brain and how movement affects mental health, it's as if humans were born to move, and when we are physically active, it puts us in a state of not just body but of mind to be the best version of ourselves.
In fact, I often talk to business groups and businesses, and if you ask people in business, are emotional intelligence skills necessary for success? The most seasoned people, the top executives, 70-80% will say, oh, of course. Yeah. If you ask educators, they may not know that. Yeah. Because they're taught that, your math and your language skills, which of course are important, is what's going to help you in life. The truth is, though, the data from the business world and the working world is that those are entry-level skills. Everybody has them. You need to have good math skills, of course. But what is going to make you a good team member? What's going to make you an outstanding performer? What's going to make you an excellent leader has nothing to do with what you learned in schools. The distinguishing abilities are in the emotional intelligence domain. Can you persuade? Can you manage yourself well? Can you empathize? Those are the skills that matter in the working world. So I feel that the school curriculum should reflect that, but teach these skills of future leadership, of future, being an effective worker, a good community citizen, a good husband, good wife, good parent. Teach those in school.
All right. So once again, we are working today and this whole series on how can we support teachers. We are not bringing teachers down. It is all how can we support you. Let's look at our students after they leave high school. All right. These are old statistics. 30% jump in the number of students seeking help at university counseling centers. Look over on the right, UC Irvine, USC, Chapman, huge increases. The USC Dean of Religious Life. Look at the bottom. The numbers are really troubling. They're huge. To me, it's not an issue. It's the issue. Those are the wait times for those 3 universities. They've gotten better. That's a 2-year-old statistic. Let me throw some more. 400%. Between 1988 and 2008, the amount of prescriptions for antidepressants grew 400%. Another one, 20%. 1 out of 5 of our adults in this country have an identified anxiety disorder. That means there's way more that aren't identified. 70%. That number represents the number or the percentage of our young people that are in the juvenile injustice system that have mental health conditions. And they didn't get the conditions after they got there. They had them already. And we don't address them. So I did not do a breakout room, and I'm going to try and do it. After looking at and hearing all the statistics, what do you, oh my God, I didn't write that right. What do you think of mental wellness skills? Or when you think of mental wellness skills, I did write it right. What do you think of? Do they have anything to do with student learning? And the big one is, when do you think people should gain mental wellness skills? So, can you help me? We didn't plan this out, sister. Or we can just do it here. Let's just do it here. Forget about the breakout rooms. Let's take 4 minutes and everybody chime in however you want.
Mr. Gray, I don't know if this is, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I noticed that my ability to handle things emotionally, my mental wellness skills have gone down through the pandemic.
Right.
And that's something I think we need to address, is that, kids who were really great March 12th last year may not be doing so great now, and teachers as well.
Well, that's their mental health. I would say that's a reflection of our skills, though. Even in the midst of, I'm not putting that down. I mean, I agree. Everything is much more challenging. But our students are doing it without skills. And I'm going to get to those skills in a minute. How about everything else? Anybody else? Or when do you think people should gain mental wellness skills?
As infants and children.
Right?
I was going to say, as soon as they start dealing with other human beings.
Right? And when do we as an education system actually help students gain those, like explicitly?
We used to do it in kindergarten.
Okay.
But now kindergarten has become academic.
There you go. All right. Other, I can't see the chat, my bad. What else you guys got? Like, those are really the big ones.
I think it should be a mandatory class for incoming freshmen or incoming 6th grade. Whenever you enter a new school environment, I think it would be very important to have this kind of class that focuses on the culture of the institution they're entering, the culture of the place that they're entering. And, there's a lot of, you saw the stress levels, in that statistics. I think, particularly when we talk about PACE, it's a high level stress from the very beginning and all the way to the very end. But also our other students experience stress in different levels. The social anxiety is huge when you're trying to fit into new groups, and the placement of kids on campus, where people sit. All of that is so anxiety, driving for all of the freshmen when they come in. And I think it'd be so great if we had a class that focused on this.
Right.
It'd be so neat.
So let's go. When you think of mental wellness skills, what do you think of? And think back to. That's why I showed that first video, not the first long one is what I'm talking about. What do you think of as real mental wellness skills?
I think students should know how to take care of themselves. Like when it was talking about how you have to slow down your breathing a little bit because it helps.
Right.
Movement helps, like exercise, eating right, sleeping, just knowing how to deal with things that come up in their life, like all the empathy, having empathy for other people.
Right.
It helps you.
Right. And those are the foundations. those are just the basics. Yeah. Keep going. I'm sorry.
I think also, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Brenda. I was going to read the comments coming in the chat, and I'll do that after your comments, Brenda.
I think it's also the ability to recognize when something is going wrong and feeling like it's okay to ask for help. I think our kids feel that they can't ask for help because people think there's something wrong with them.
Right.
And so they ignore the signs that they're getting overly stressed and they're having, problems until it blows.
Yep. Exactly.
And we as adults, I think, do that too, especially right now.
Right. No, especially. And that's part of our note taking, right? Is we're simultaneously thinking of our students, but we're also thinking of ourselves, because that's going to be the focus of these weeks, is how can we grow together as teachers and students? And really, that's when we're going to be the most effective. So Linda, go ahead, and then I'll play this video. Let's read a couple of them.
Yeah, I'll just read out a few things. Marisol said, the entire community, city, nation, planet has experienced mass trauma. Rachel said, mental wellness skills will help students deal with adversity, enable them to approach learning in a non-adversarial way. Yeah. Jennifer says, I take precedent with teaching moments over curriculum because they need it.
Yeah.
And then teaching students coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable with them and authentic about the emotions we feel and how we can process them, how to be self-aware and be able to evaluate what's happening in their brain and deal with emotions. A lot of coping processes.
Right.
Knowing your triggers.
There you go.
Knowing your triggers.
So,
yeah.
So there's 57 million pre-K through grade 12 students approximately in the United States. And if 57 million on the daily we're learning exactly what you just talked about, then we would be way further ahead in being able to deliver this wonderful academic knowledge that we know that they need, but aren't able to receive. So here we go. I think this is Brene Brown talking about vulnerability. Someone had that in the chat. Here we go. Why can't our kids really receive what we're trying to give them? Or if they're receiving it, are super anxious and super depressed. Here we go.
And we think, I don't want to be vulnerable because vulnerability, where's my slideshow? There it is the center of shame and scarcity and fear and anxiety and grief and disappointment. So I am going to armor up and self-protect. I'm not going to let people hurt me, see me, take advantage of me. The problem is that when we armor up like that, not only is vulnerability certainly the center of these experiences, it's also the center of these: love and belonging and joy. So love, belonging, and joy, absolute vulnerability, but also these things: courage, empathy, trust, innovation, and creativity. No vulnerability, no innovation, no creativity. Accountability, adaptability to change, hard conversations, feedback, problem solving, and ethical decision making all require vulnerability. Instead of having an open heart, we end up with a closed heart. We end up with a protected heart for a lot of different reasons. Some of them are environmental. Let me tell you this for sure. The greatest casualty of trauma is vulnerability. The worst thing we lose in trauma is vulnerability. And let's be very clear about what constitutes trauma. Racism is trauma. Poverty is trauma. Classism, trauma. Homophobia, heterosexism, trauma. People ask me all the time, what's your goal in your life? I was like, to make the world a braver place. If you had one opportunity, what would be the most effective impact you could ever do? I said, if I could get in front of every teacher in the world and we could have real conversations about shame, about vulnerability, about courage, because I think the revolution will not be televised, it will be in your classrooms. That is where this will happen. 100%.
And that's why we're here today, because we all know that we can do it. We just need the support. Again, here's the Dr. Kurt Fisher quote, "One of the most beneficial things that brain research has done has made it very hard for us to split cognition from emotion. So when I'm not emotionally engaged for every type of reason under the sun, I'm not able to learn." All right. So really quick, super quick. We spend most of our educational day in terms of trying to help students get a growth mindset in their least effective way of thinking, their conscious state, meaning we have an assembly here, we'll have a lesson over there, we'll have a pearl of wisdom from Miss Hickman over here. And those are all cool, but that's not how our brain really works. We'll get it, but if we don't, what's the best way to gain new skills? Tell me, help me out. What's the best way? Like in math, gaining a second language, in music, anything. Help me out. Practicing, right? And when we don't practice every day, we lose it. The connections in our brain that we started to form from that first lesson, they're gone. So what do we need to do? We all have a fixed mindset. I know the fixed mindset, growth mindset with Dweck. I'm playing on the words. Our subconscious is our most powerful way of thinking. All right, form of thinking, part of thinking. It's our habit loop. So that's obvious then that we need to daily work on this stuff so that it becomes what? More reflexive. Our brain wants the easy way out. It comes up with shortcuts all the time because we have so much information coming in. So the more that we can make mental wellness skills, breath work, empathizing with somebody, when those become reflexive, now my mental wellness skills are helping my mental health. All right. This is Dr. Gabor Mate. He was born into Nazi-occupied Hungary, and he's a Vancouver physician, but he's really good with addiction. He's good with childhood trauma stuff. And I want to play him. He's going to lay out the physical stuff of trauma and why it keeps students from learning. You're going to hear him twice.
What the introductions don't usually mention, and I actually used to be a high school teacher. I taught high school for 3 years in North Vancouver and decided that was way too stressful, so I went to medical school instead. I went to work in the downtown east side of Vancouver. I thought that would be a relief. So I know about what many of you are up against. Let me turn now to an article that appeared in the journal Pediatrics, which is the official journal of the American Pediatric Association. And this article appeared in February 2012. And it summed up very nicely the accumulated knowledge of the past several decades. And the article is from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. And they say, growing scientific evidence demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of scarcity, stress, and I stress the word stress here, or instability can lead to short-term physiologic and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which may come at a significant cost to long-term outcomes in learning, behavior, health, and longevity. In other words, the things that young human beings have to develop as adaptive mechanisms to survive early stress will help them endure that early stress, but in the long term will interfere with health and learning, adaptation, social relationships, and even longevity.
Here's some notes to take.
I knew that tuning out is not a disease. On the contrary, what actually is tuning out? Why did nature give us the capacity to tune out, to dissociate? Why do you think that is? It's a survival mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. If I were to stress you right now by threatening you or just insulting your dignity as a human being, you'd have three healthy options. One would be to walk out. Escape. Flight. The other would be to fight. To challenge me. Stand up for yourself. And if for whatever reason you're unable to engage in either of those modalities, you have a third one. There are hundreds of people here in the room with you. You could seek help. You could say, please help me. This guy's bugging me. But if none of those were available to you and the stress was immense and intense, what your mind would do, what your brain would do was escape from that. And one of the ways of escaping would be to just dissociate, to tune out. So tuning out is not a disease. It's a nature-given capacity that we have to escape overwhelming stress. When we look at, furthermore, what the impact of early stress is on the child's brain and the child's capacity to learn, what are we up against? Well, we're up against those coping mechanisms that the child adapted. So one coping mechanism was the dissociation, the tuning out. The problem is that when a child has to adapt these modalities chronically, early in childhood, that gets programmed into the brain. Because there are times in the first year of life when every second, so consider this space of time, millions of circuits are being laid down, millions of connections are being made. It's that rapid, it's that intense, the brain growth. So if stress happens in a parent's life during that period, if the mother is depressed, for example, or the father overworked, or there's unresolved family issues, that will have an impact on the child. We're not talking about learned behaviors here. We're talking about emotional-based coping mechanisms. Now, that's one way to the brain protects itself from stress. Another way that the brain protects itself from stress is a kind of emotional shutdown, of not being aware of feelings. Now, at the extreme case of that, you have people who totally shut down emotionally. The problem with shutting down emotionally is you stop learning. Emotional learning stops when you shut down. So you shut down to protect yourself, but for development, you need vulnerability. Vulnerability from the Latin word vulnerare, to wound. So vulnerability is our capacity to be wounded. And nothing grows when it's not vulnerable. A tree doesn't grow where it's hard and thick. It grows where it's soft and green and vulnerable. Same with children. When children shut down emotionally, they have difficulty learning, especially from negative experience. So they keep repeating the same stuff over and over again, and despite the negative consequences, they learn nothing from it. And then the adult gets exasperated. I've told him 1,000 times not to do it, and he's still doing it. Well, the proper response is, if you've told him 1,000 times, and he's still doing it, who's got the learning problem here? Clearly what we have to do is we have to find out what's going on for that child. The third way of emotional self-protection is detachment from relationship, and particularly from relationships that threaten you. So a lot of kids detach from adult relationships, and by default, as we point out, Gordon Neufeld and I in our book, Hold On To Your Kids, they connect to other kids. And when that happens, learning also stops. Because for learning, what you need curiosity. But curiosity is vulnerable. When you are curious, you care about something. When you're emotionally shut down, you don't care about anything. It's boring. It doesn't matter. Number one. You also learn from trial and error. But for trial and error, you have to have the vulnerability to admit that something doesn't work and to be sad about it. When you're defended against sadness, when nothing matters, you're not going to learn from negative experiences. You're not going to try something again. Instead, you're going to say, I don't care. And you just give up. That I don't care of the frustrated child. People learn through attachment. In other words, when you are emotionally attached to somebody, you want to emulate them, you want to be like them, you want to learn from them. Well, that's fine in societies when children still attached to adults. But what happens in a society when children emotionally are connected to each other so much that they can't bear to be without each other for one moment, and every second that they're not in physically in each other's presence, they have to be testing one another? That's not a technological problem. It's an attachment problem. It also means that they're not learning from the adults who can actually tell them what life is about. So these are the consequences of those early adaptive mechanisms on learning.
Can you see your students? Can you see them? I can see me even personally. So very quickly, this is my cycle of life, and it starts at the top. How I feel about myself, my belief in myself, my belief in how my life will work out. And then over on the right, something new that I've learned working with a professor from Rochester. Do I believe I have the ability to handle challenges? All right. And that's where we are not, if you look at the blue with the lightning bolts, that's where we should be spending most of our time and energy. But if you follow the loop around to the bottom blue, we spend most of our time and resources on interventions. Once a week interventions, once a month interventions, once in a while interventions. And they're cool. We need them. However, what happens when I have that intervention and my friends didn't hear about it? Who am I going to go kick it with after I receive my pearls of wisdom from whatever the intervention was? I'm going to go kick it with my friends who have no idea what I'm talking about. And I'm supposed to be that courageous to change my whole group of friends by myself? That doesn't happen very often. So therefore, we need to do the whole school. More of Gabor Mate. This is the last one of him. Here we go. He's going to really give us some good solutions.
But the problem is that these are both defensive modes. And the human organism can be in defensive mode or growth mode, learning mode, but not both at the same time. So that the mode in which we're in a learning phase, when I'm paying attention to another person, when I'm listening to the message that they're delivering, when my middle ear muscles are activated in such a way as to take in verbal information, when my head turns towards you so I can observe your face and respond to your facial expressions, when I'm taking in and responding to the prosody, the modulation of your voice, that's yet another brain circuit. That's yet another brain circuit. And it activates a totally different set of nerves in a different part of the nervous system. And that's called the social engagement mode. And the nerves that regulate our social engagement behavior are very much connected to the nerves that carry information from our viscera, from our internal organs, and the nerves that at the same time regulate our breathing, our breath, whether it's shallow or deep, whether our airways are narrow or broad, and our heart rate. So again, to go back to what Damasio said about that unity between the internal environment and our capacity to learn, modulated through the emotional apparatus. And that's called the social engagement mode. But to be in a social engagement mode, we have to feel safe. We have to feel emotionally safe. Now let me tell you, as a physician interested in ADHD, and that was the subject of my first book, how many adults in their 40s and 50s I saw in my office who spoke with choked tones and sometimes tears in their eyes about something that a teacher had said to them decades ago that was humiliating. And the teacher meant nothing harmful by it. They might even be trying to humorously support the kid. But as recent research shows, there seem to be receptors in our temporal lobe that gauge our degree of safety, emotional safety. And when we don't feel safe, then either the fees or the flight or fight mechanisms are engaged. And when a child is in that fight or flight mechanism, they can't learn. When we yell at a kid, when we exclude a child, when we isolate them, when we look at them in a harsh way, when we use a tone of voice that expresses our irritation and incomprehension, when we don't understand the child's emotional states or the child feels a lack of attunement with us, we're actually triggering their defensive states. Now, one of the things that mindfulness practice will do, such as we teach kids, is to actually help them regulate their internal states. But surely, as long as they're immature, and given that they're so connected to adults, and children are necessarily dependent on the environment because they're not independent, they're not mature, as long as that's the case, and incidentally, this is the truth for a lifetime, that their emotional states, their visceral states, the heart and lungs, the receptivity of their nerves, their sense of safety depends purely on the environment and largely on the environment. So it's up to us then to provide that emotional safety for them. And that's much more important than the academic learning we're trying to convey. Not that that isn't important, but without that emotional basis to it, it just will not penetrate. So Dr. Stephen Porges, who's done a lot of the work on the neurophysiology that I've conveyed to you some of, he says in an interview, when fear is removed, it's empowering. If your nervous system is safe, you can do lots of interesting things. When your nervous system detects risk and fear, you can't even sit in your room without being hypervigilant. And that depends very much on our internal perception of safety. Now the problem is, and this is my final comment, the problem is that when children grow up in stressed environments, as increasingly they do, they don't even perceive safety when it's there. They mistake safety for lack of safety, and unfortunately sometimes they mistake lack of safety for safety. And these are the kids who get into trouble. And so that our job as educators, as healthcare givers, as psychologists, as parents, as anybody that has anything to do whatsoever with children, is primarily and first of all to forget about the, not to forget about them, but to prioritize. And the first priority has to be the absolute emotional security of our children. Thank you.
All right. So how powerful will it be as we grow together, gaining mental wellness skills? I need this stuff. I use it every day, but I still need it, right? So if we can get it through ourselves and make it systemic where we are all working through this together, not only does it create relationships, it creates skills for a lifetime that will translate for the rest of their life, and we can bring in parents. One way that I do this is I have this as a weekly assignment. And it really does the mind, body, spirit, or if you're not spiritual, the mind, body, source of strength connection. And over on the far right, it breaks it into breath work and the simple act of breathing through your nose all day long, as opposed to mouth breathing, and slower than usual. And then, of course, practicing breathing techniques that do help when anxiety happens. There's all sorts of breathing techniques. Are you drinking water? Did you move today? Did you dance to some songs? Anything. Do you feel rested? Are you watching what you eat? Or not watching what you eat? Are you eating what you need to eat, right? And we let the students come up with their own plan to make this happen. Did I write an entry of gratitude in my journal? Did I send out at least one appreciation to one person? At least one person. And then did I catch myself when I started complaining, speaking negatively about myself or others or my situation? That's what we're working. These are the foundations. And at the bottom right, I say, speaking up and taking action for social justice, that's not complaining or being negative. This is not about classroom management. This is not about that. This is about building skills that are going to help for their whole life, okay? And all of that we just heard, it's not about bad parenting. It's not about bad teaching. It is about stress parenting. Our parents are stressed. Our teachers are stressed. And when I'm stressed, I'm not at my best. I can't believe I just made a rhyme. But it's true. So the more that we can go through these together, the more that we will build our school climate, our school culture. Students will feel even more connected to our school. Our D and F list has been crazy for years. All right, it's not a pandemic thing, although it's exacerbated it. Oh my God. Our anxiety and our depression amongst our students who are quote unquote high achievers, that's still what it's always been. And our anxiety and depression, that survey I did, very few PACE students. In fact, half of that 400 students that had the symptoms of trauma were athletes. They don't report nothing except they reported that. You know what I'm saying? So this is one, if all of our teachers put this as an extra credit assignment or something every week, that's something easy that we can do as a school. Every teacher does it. Kids get, okay, well, this must be important. Every teacher's doing it. And it's up to them to create their day to make it happen. And if I could really quickly, I know it's almost 4 o'clock, so hang with me. I'm going to get you this lesson. A former student of mine, Adam Edwards, he's a chemistry teacher at Wilson. He said, Gray, I did it. I'm doing what you're saying. I had a breakthrough and I used Moana. I'm like, what? So I want you to watch this, and I have the lesson for you, how easy it is to come up with a lesson that students are engaged in. Think about the characters that you see here and your perceptions of them really quick. And I'm going to play it really quick, and then we'll talk about it for a second because I'm done.
Tafiti, it's gone. Let her come to me. I have crossed the horizon to find you. I know your name. They have stolen the heart from inside you. But this does not define you. This is not who you are. You know who you are. Who you truly are.
So, I mean, it opens it up for all sorts of discussion about when you allow yourself to be who you really are, that's when you gain your power. When you don't let yourself feel like you don't have your heart, how it makes you, into the type of person that Tefiti was before she got her heart back. I don't know. That's what I've got. I hope I conveyed, what is going on with our kids and where we as a whole school can really make a difference if we'll do it together. I don't know. I tried really hard. I hope that made sense. And I want to set the table for everyone that's coming up in this series is going to add to this real basic concept of what I was throwing out there.
All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to do a little presentation sharing some results of a survey that we did with students that was sent out on Friday, because it's about where they're at. Oops. They're social emotionally where they're at. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So on Friday, I pushed out a student survey. I was really excited because we actually still have students responding, and over 500 students responded. This was an anonymous survey. It was a very sensitive survey. I actually ran it past our research office and had them vet it before I put out the questions. And I made sure that students knew that it wasn't collecting any personal or identifying information. But what I wanted to know is, what are some of the things that they've been through during the pandemic? Like, has somebody in their family died? Have they had to move? Did somebody lose a job? How are they feeling? So it was a very sensitive survey, and very pleased that over 500 of our students responded. Just if you don't know who I am, because some of you are new to our staff, I'm Linda Carga. I'm one of the APs here. And one of my goals this year is to really support the wellness of all students and staff at Poly. All right, so we sent out the survey last Friday. Anonymous, no identifying information because of the sensitivity of the questions. And I already talked about the research office vetted it. Well, yesterday when I made this presentation, 482 Poly students responded, but it's still an active survey. And we actually have a little over 500 students respond when I just checked it about an hour ago. So based on yesterday's results, you could see the distribution by grade level. Mostly it was, a lot of our 11th and 12th graders, but really pretty evenly, pretty even by grade level. And then I asked their pathway, because I could vet this data by pathway, and all our pathways responded. You could see we were most heavy on our PACE and CIC students responded, but we actually have students of every single pathway who responded to the survey. I also asked them their gender identity. By the way, the thing that you see here, just so you know, where it says pink and blue, unicorn, gender fluid, students had the ability to put in the field other, so they could put whatever they wanted. So I didn't put pink and blue unicorn on the survey, in case you were wondering. So however they wanted to identify, my questions were, do they identify as female, male, non-binary, prefer not to state, or other? And some of them filled in the other. So actually going back to that one, you can see almost 66% of the people who responded were female. And then you can also see by the race, a lot of our students, the largest category are Hispanic students, but then you can see all our racial groups are represented in this survey. Okay, so one of the first questions, sorry, because I know this slide's a little bit awkward, but I tried to cut and paste it in as best I could. But I was asking questions like, did they become sick? Did they have to take care of a family member? Did they lose a friend? Like, did somebody die? Did they lose a friend? Did they lose a family member? Did they have to take care of kids, other kids in their family? Did they have another stressful experience? And then you see a lot of these ones because they could also put in other. But really what stood out in this data is over half of our students had a family become sick with COVID during this time. About a quarter of our students helped with childcare at home, and about a quarter of our students reported, actually over a quarter, that somebody in their family lost a job over the past year. So those are some things that really stood out. I also asked them, like, what are the things that they are feeling? Are they feeling okay? Are they stressed? Are they lonely? Are they happy? I mean, you could see that the number one thing our students were feeling, surprising, is they feel stressed, followed by anxious, and then they also feel lonely. Many, a number of them were happy or they were just okay. But the number one thing, 85% of our students are telling us they feel stressed and they feel anxious during this time. The other thing I asked them is, how do you feel now that you know we're returning to face-to-face instruction? Do you feel happy about it, excited, nervous, stressed? Number one thing, they are nervous. 66% of our students said they're nervous to come back. And 52% of our students are stressed to come back. So again, the top things they told me, not that they were happy or excited, although many of them also are, but they are nervous, they are stressed, and they are fearful to come back. So that's one of the reasons of having this series, is we know they're feeling all these things. And then I asked them, what type of support would they like to have when returning to face-to-face instruction? I gave them, a list, but then they could also come up with their own ideas. Biggest ask of our students is they'd like increased time for social activities with their friends. Not surprising, because many haven't seen their friends face-to-face in the last year. So, and then actually a significant amount of our students said that they would like some support with their grief or some support with loss, because a number of them have lost somebody in our family. So this was a really important data. I think it's really significant that, let me stop our share. I think it's significant that a quarter of our students responded to this survey. I was very pleased, because I think, you could say, that's a fourth of our school helping out with an anonymous survey, and that's the information they gave us. And it's really important guiding information to kind of take a thermometer, like get a temperature, a reading of where they're at. So that's just some guiding data. I'm going to hand it over to Michael in a minute, but could I answer anything about what I just went over? It was a pretty quick review of the data.
Ms. Orozco asked if they can get a copy of that.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I put a copy of this presentation in the schedule. So for each of the sessions, I shared the slide deck with you. And then for each session, I'm sharing the slide deck. And then after each session is over, I'm also going to upload the video as well. So all of this, and I can also give you the link right now too. I'll put it in the chat. Absolutely, you can.
And Miss Tila's statistics class wants to tear into it also, I think.
Can I get a file with just the data? What do you mean by that? Like, can I ask what you mean by a file of it? The spreadsheet. Can I talk to you after it? Because I know some of it is a little sensitive. Is there any way to identify the subgroups who are stressed? If there's predominant response from PACE students, is it possible? So yes, so one of the things is if you're interested, I can separate it out further for you. So for example, Ron is asking about the PACE students. I can make charts, like based on our data, I could sort the information just for the PACE students or just based on pathway. One of the reasons I asked the questions by grade level, pathway, gender, and so forth is so I could sort the data that way. So yes, I can give you that data. Okay, CSV. Yes, I can work on that for you. Some of you want the raw data, or the access to the spreadsheet. I think what I'll go ahead and do, because it is still active right now, like I said, that like in the last day, about 15 more students have taken it. So I can give you, I can make a copy, and I'm happy to share that with you if you'd like to look through it some more. Absolutely. It is really important data. I'm happy to share it.